Welcome to the Pinfall. I'm your host, Danny Bell. Let's get into it. Region Sports Network is your go-to source for local sports, but they're also passionate about every sport that they cover. Not just the sport, but everyone involved in the sport as well. Today, we have a really good high school, and Coach Wadkins with 455 career dual meet wins amongst the state's top 20. Top 20. That's how good he is. 3 or 4 semi-state team finishes, 4 top 20 state finals team finishes, 20 consecutive winning seasons. And Coach Wadkins has been the epitome of wrestling in the region for many years now. Today's episode is probably going to be one of the best episodes we have in the next 2-3 years because of the knowledge that Coach is going to give to us. He's a treasure trove of knowledge, and he's put together a pretty detailed, not so brief as he would call it, get together of all the happenings for wrestling since wrestling started in Indiana. So, Coach, how are you today? Yeah, you did a deep dive into this. It took a long time to get it all together, hadn't it?
It took a little longer than I anticipated. I didn't think it would be that hard, but as I got closer and closer to the time I've been coaching in wrestling, it got harder because I know a lot of the people and I've coached with and they've officiated and they've been on my teams. And yeah, it was harder than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Well, Coach, it's an honor to have you on today. And, you know, you had a conversation with our producer, Chris Ramirez, last year at Semi-State and talked about the possibilities maybe coming on the Pinfall for an episode or two to dive into the rich history of wrestling in the Northwest Indiana 219 area code region. And now that we got you on here, having conversations with you on the phone, I thought I knew wrestling. And hearing just a few of the conversations with you, I knew that there was so much more for me to learn and maybe something that maybe everyone else has overlooked or forgotten about. And we got you here today, and hopefully you can help us bring that to light here.
Well, I don't think I'm going to be a very animated guest. I've got a lot of information in front of me. I want to honor these men, you know, in this first episode. The first episode is going to be before the women got involved very much. We're going to do a second episode, I hope, from about 1980 till the current time. But this is going to cover the first 50 some odd years of the Indiana High School State Tournament and wrestling in the Calumet region.
That's great. Well, Coach, I'll let you take it from here then.
Whenever you're ready.
Wherever you want to start, buddy.
Okay, well, if it looks like I'm reading a lot of this, it's because I am. So please bear with me. I'm going to try to pause for questions occasionally. But I got a lot to say, and I want to get at it. So let me know when I need to shut up.
Go right at it, Coach.
Before we begin rambling tonight about all things Indiana High School wrestling and Calumet Region wrestling, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank some people along the way, organizations whose monumental bodies of work that I've borrowed from for much of the information that we're going to talk about tonight. A gentleman named Dave Holman wrote a book in the early 90s called Ready Wrestle. It's a history of the Indiana State High School Wrestling Tournament. It was published in 1992. Holman wrestled at Southport High School in the mid-1960s for Hall of Fame coach Chauncey McDaniel and later for Paul Velez at Indiana Central. He coached high school wrestling for 20 years at Eastern Hancock and at his alma mater, Southport. He also served long tenures as the Indiana High School Wrestling Coaching Association's Hall of Fame banquet chairman and as the association historian. Number 2 is a gentleman named Richard J. He put together a brochure that used to hand it out to the coaches at the Indiana State Finals called Matt Burns. And it was full of records and information. It was chock full of season and career records, team and family wins and losses and pins. He wrestled at Muncie South for Coach Jim Cartwright, a Hall of Famer. And he taught and coached in Hammond Gavitt for 30 some odd years. He ran a fan favorite Pick the Champions contest downstate and for decades. And in 2015, the coaches of the Lake County tournament decided after his passing to name the Outstanding Wrestler Award at the Lake County tournament in his honor. And finally, Richard Neal wrote a book called Echoes of the Ancient Elder. And it's a detailed history of the Indiana High School State Wrestling Tournament. It was published in 2002. Neil wrestled at Indianapolis Manual for Coach Jack Foster in the late 1950s. His sons, Richard and Brian, placed first and second at the state finals for Martinsville High School in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Both men later served as team captains for the University of Indianapolis wrestling program. Also, I'd like to thank Joe Caprino for a lot of the information that I've accessed on Indiana Mat, the IHSAA's archives, and their website, and the Indiana High School Wrestling Coaches Association's Hall of Fame programs, as well as my own 50-plus years of recollections on what I consider the world's oldest and greatest sport.
Yes.
To go back to what you said a minute ago, this past February at the East Chicago Semi-State, Chris Ramirez, the founder and owner of Region Sports Network, he sat down next to me and we struck up a conversation about Calumet High School, our athletic history, our field house, several of the legendary Calumet High School athletes and coaches that we've had over the years, and our big wrestling invitational that we host every December that is oddly named after a basketball coach, Chris Trikoff. We agreed to do a show after the wrestling season ended about the history of the Indiana Wrestling State Tournament and the Calumet Region Wrestling, as well as some of the outstanding wrestlers, coaches, officials, people that have helped build the area's wrestling reputation into what it is today, which is kind of Calumet Region strong. I refer to you here, Danny Bell, Anthony Hawkins, two region guys that wrestled at local high schools, and RSN wrestling commentators. They reached out to me a few weeks ago to schedule this show. I've been preparing diligently. I've actually called Dan several times and asked for extensions because it wasn't going as quickly as I thought, and I was having to tie it in with the start of school. So it was a couple of late nights, a lot of typing. My wife is kind of sick of hearing about this already. If you can make a wrestling coach's wife sick of something, dive into something for about a month and occupy your laptop in your living room. So
if anyone knows that, Coach, I do.
I've been preparing, like I said, I've been preparing for it pretty diligently ever since in an effort to do this proud. It's been a labor of love. There's a lot of men on here that a lot of us have been able to climb up on their shoulders to do our job. And because of them, it made our job quite a bit easier. And I really want to honor a lot of those men and women who have done those things for us. Like I said, I kept moving the deadline back, but this mountain of information needed to be pared down. And again, the closer I got to my era, the harder it got to be. But here goes nothing. We're ready to rumble.
Coach, I've been waiting for this for a while.
The Bible. You didn't know we were going that far, did you?
Yeah, I was waiting for this.
The Bible mentions wrestling in Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 30, where Jacob wrestles with an angel. It also mentions wrestling in Ephesians 6:12 and in Jude 3, where wrestling is used as a metaphor for spiritual battles against wickedness and those who oppose the truth. Genesis is believed to have been written by Moses around 1400 BC. There aren't many sports that have a pedigree like that.
No.
Wrestling first appeared in the ancient Olympic Games in Greece as an event during the 18th Olympiad around 776 BC. Like I said, that's quite a legacy, quite a pedigree our sport has to fall back on. And just think about it. Not long ago, they tried removing the three disciplines of wrestling from the Olympic Games. The World Wrestling Nations, United World Wrestling, UWW, the World Wrestling Governing Body came together and we found a way to keep it in.
Thankfully.
So that's the earliest history of our story before it gets to Indiana.
And afterwards, it blew up.
In the 1890s, there was virtually no wrestling in the high schools around the United States, but it flourished in athletic clubs and in colleges. After 1900, the sport began to grow under the sponsorship of a lot of local YMCAs around the country, that big YMCA movement. In fact, James Naismith, the inventor of basketball, was one of the directors at the Springfield YMCA who trained and educated men to travel around the United States and run these YMCA athletic departments. The Gary YMCA, which was a massive stone edifice located on the south side of Fifth Avenue, sort of catty corner to today's Genesis Center. It was built in 1909, a $200,000 gift from the city's namesake, founder Judge Elbert Gary. He purchased it to provide entertainment and support for the young men of Gary. Under the tutelage of George M. Pinio, an AAU champion wrestler in his own right, the Steel City YMCA won several Y titles and 3 national YMCA crowns during his tenure from 1912 to 1927. In 1920, the Gary YMCA actually played host to the U.S. Olympic freestyle trials. Pinio was chosen by the Amateur Athletic Union to coach and lead the team at the games of the 7th Olympiad in Antwerp, Belgium. He led the U.S. Freestyle Olympic Wrestling team to a 6-medal performance with 1 gold, 2 silver, and 3 bronze medals. The gentleman was from northeast Illinois, just across the state line from Kentland.
Okay.
And how he ended up in Gary, Indiana, I don't have any idea, but he's buried in a little town called Watseka, Illinois. I've not visited. It's great, but I plan to someday.
Okay.
Because a lot of our history, a lot of Indiana wrestling is based in this man, and nobody knows who he is, and that's walking around here today. I found him quite by accident. I'm going to have to shift my eyes here to get to another page, so bear with me. I hope this isn't blocking the screen.
No, you're fine, Coach.
In collegiate wrestling, the Eastern schools kind of led the way. When the first intercollegiate dual meet was held at Columbia University on March 21st, 1903, the Lions hosted Yale as a preliminary event, and I hate to say this out loud, to a basketball game. The meet ended in a 2 draw when Yale's heavyweight was forced to forfeit. They met again a week later with Yale winning 2 bouts, tying 1, and again forfeiting a heavyweight match for a final score of 2.5 to 1.5. In 1905, Columbia and Yale joined Penn and Princeton to form the student-run Eastern Intercollegiate Wrestling Association, the EIWA, the nation's first wrestling conference, and it's still in existence today. They organized and held the first tournament for college students in America at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. On the high school level, there was considerable growth in intramural activity, but interscholastic competition was still years away. Many colleges were still recruiting most of the wrestlers from high schools without wrestling teams. Coaches were out and about, beating the bushes, looking for talented athletes with wrestling potential in gyms, health clubs, and YMCAs. The rules regulating college wrestling were much more liberal than they are today. Oftentimes, college teams would seek out competition wherever they could find it, whether it was against local high school intramural teams, private athletic clubs, police athletic leagues, military-based teams, or local YMCA squads. Many of the Big Ten's teams would plan their travel itineraries to work out at the Gary YMCA on their way to or from league duels at Michigan, Illinois, Chicago, Northwestern, Purdue, and Indiana. These impromptu on-the-road workouts helped wrestlers make weight for their Big Ten duels, provided stiff competition for their backups, and it allowed Big Ten coaches to evaluate the local talent working out and competing for these teams. Many a champion was discovered during these pit stops through the crossroads of Big Ten country. The East was slower to adopt scholastic wrestling than their Midwest counterparts. In the largely rural Midwest, wrestling was less an inheritance from the ancient civilizations and more a product of high spirits, brawny young farm boys, and barnyard scuffling. Farmhands called it catch as catch can and gladly graduated to roped-off rings with rough canvas mats long before the advent of high-tech mats, foam cushion knee pads, and protective headgear. The first high school wrestling competition in the United States was held in the state of Oklahoma in 1919. The state of Iowa was the first to conduct a high school state championship in 1921. Oklahoma launched its tourney in 1922, the same year as Indiana. So the Hoosier State has had a state wrestling tournament nearly as long as anyone in America. From
Probably why we're so good.
Yeah, that's why. I think we had some catching up to do for a while, but
we're knocking on the door.
Yeah, we were in the hunt. Our guys are doing a good job. They were represented
Yes.
very well at the Olympics this summer.
Very.
Some of them are even trying to make NFL football teams now.
Yeah, almost did.
From 1922 to 1932, the IHSAA bought the awards and paid for lodging. However, Indiana University actually hosted the tourney on its Bloomington campus. By 1930, there were 20 plus teams spread out around Indiana. Due to this rapid growth, the IHSAA took over the complete sponsorship of the state tourney from 1933 to 1943, with Indiana University continuing as host. These early state tourneys were opens with wrestlers and coaches, often a principal or a faculty sponsor, loading up station wagons and making the trek to Bloomington to compete without any qualifying tourney and often with very little coaching or mat experience. Hoosier wrestlers helped run the meets by setting up and serving as timers for the matches. Often the college coaches or even opposing coaches would serve as match officials, rotating out when their athletes were competing. From 1922 to 1935, matches consisted, get this, of one period, 8 minutes in length, with a neutral start.
Wow.
There was no point system in place for scoring matches. All matches had to be decided by a pin or by accumulated writing time. At the end of the match, they went to writing time, and that decided it.
So we used to have writing time in high school.
It was still in effect in the 60s in Indiana.
Wow.
But this was the only way they decided matches in the early years.
That is so insane to hear.
In 1935-36, match periods, referees' positions, and a rudimentary point system were implemented. During these early years, some schools entered full 10-man teams, while others showed up with just one or two individuals. The tourney was held on one weekend. All wrestlers entered in a certain weight class were paired up by a blind draw, which created the possibility for the two best wrestlers to meet in the first round. So the tourney was made double elimination with full wrestlebacks to 4 places.
Wow.
And thus the start of the Indiana High School Athletic Association in the 1920s. The initial Indiana High School State Wrestling Tournament was held on Saturday, April 22nd, 1922, with 7 teams. 19 total wrestlers showed up, vying in 7 different weight classes. The inaugural 7 teams that took part were Bloomington, Bluffton, Evansville Central, Gary Emerson, Gary Frable, Terre Haute Garfield, and Terre Haute Wiley. The Red Streaks of Terre Haute Wiley outdistanced their crosstown rivals, the Purple Eagles of Terre Haute Garfield, 34-30 to claim the first title. The largest weight had 4 wrestlers in it, and 3 had only 2 wrestlers, so they automatically qualified for the finals. Wiley's coach, Guy Stantz, earned the honor not only of coaching the first state champion team, but also the first individual state champion in Fred Clark at 108 pounds.
Wow.
Wiley would repeat in 1923 to become the first back-to-back team champions, a feat duplicated by Bloomington in 1924 and 25, and Wabash in 1927 and 28, before the end of the decade. The 1920s would see Bloomington coach Harold F. Mumby win the first 2 of his state titles in 1924 and 25, and Wabash High School coach William H. Billy Tom win the 1927 title before departing for an 18-year career as coach of Indiana University. In fact, after he left for IU, the Apaches were regularly referred to as coachless wonders in the media during their championship season of 1928 because they didn't have a coach. So they carried on and competed and won the state championship without a coach. In 1922, Gary's Robert Beatty and David Levy became Lake County's first finalists, finishing second for Gary Emerson and Gary Frable, respectively. In 1927, Bloomington's Estill Ritter became Indiana's first 4-time state wrestling champion. In 1928, Dale Goings became the first state champion for Lowell, for Lake County, and for the Calumet region. And Mike Stepanek was LaPorte High School's first champ. Elwood, led by Ted Kuntz, and Bedford, led by Emil Head, would claim their only team wrestling titles to date in 1926 and 1929, respectively. Walter Maleziak won for LaPorte in 1929. Sadly, though, during the Great Depression, many of these new high school wrestling programs fell victim to the tough economic times. Indiana University Wrestling under Coach Billy Tom. Billy Tom's Hoosier wrestling teams would go on to win 36 consecutive dual meets, 8 Big Ten team titles, and the 1932 NCAA championship, IU's first title in any sport. The Crimson won their 1932 Big Ten and NCAA championships on the home mats of IU. Tom's Chargers would also claim 33 individual Big Ten crowns, 2 Big Ten Medals of Honor, won by Charles McDaniel in 1938 and Chris Trikoff in 1939, for their combination of academic and athletic prowess. He coached 8 individual NCAA titleists. Indiana's Edwin and George Belshaw, brothers from a farm near Lowell, both won Big Ten titles in 1932 after having never wrestled a match in high school. Tom discovered the two of them toiling at the Gary YMCA in the late 1920s. Ed won the NCAA's Outstanding Wrestler Award in 1932. The 1932 Hoosier NCAA Championship team won with 4 men from South Lake County in their lineup. Ed Belshaw, who was the champion, Dale Goings, who finished second, George Belshaw, who was a Big Ten champ and an NCAA qualifier. They all hailed from Lowell. Ambrose Rasher finished third, and he was from Cedar Lake. And the 5th place winner was Bob Jones. He had wrestled for Tom at Wabash High School. He finished third. Now, this may be a confusing thing here, but this is important to understand how the international teams were selected. Since 1932 was an Olympic year, the NCAA's doubled as a qualifier for the Olympic trials. Wow. Between the Big Tens and the NCAA's, the AAU and the NCAA agreed to condense the number of weights from the 8 NCAA weights to the 7 Olympic weights. Several Big Ten wrestlers like George Belshaw found themselves caught in between 2 weights for the NCAA's and had to either bump up or cut down a weight class. Belshaw won the Big Tens at 155, and the NCAA Olympic weight was 158, so it wasn't a big problem for him. This was of no great concern for him, but the next weight up on the NCAA Olympic docket was 174. So the 165 Big Ten runner-up, who had been a 2-time Big Ten champ the 2 years prior from Michigan, a gentleman named Carl Dugavito, he had to suck down to 158 in order to have a place to compete. And he beat Belshaw in an epic 14-minute opening round overtime bout at the NCAA's. And Dugavito would go on to win the NCAA's and qualify for the trials. It cost Belshaw an All-American plaque and a spot in the trials. Dugavito would lose a controversial match to a gentleman named Jack Van Beber in the trials final. Van Beber is from Perry, Oklahoma. In fact, I was through there about a month ago. My daughter lives in Oklahoma City. There's a statue to Dan Hodge and to Jack Van Beber in the town square of Perry, Oklahoma.
Wow.
Van Beber would go on and easily win the Olympic gold medal in Los Angeles in 32. In 1936, Billy Tom, IU's coach, would end up leading the U.S. Olympic freestyle team at the Berlin Olympics. He led them to 1 gold, 3 silver, and 3 silver medals. Bloomington's own Richard Dick Valiva placed first, second, and first at state for Bloomington High School from 1928 to 30, and he finished second and first his last 2 years of college at both the Big Tens and NCAA's in 1933 and 1934 for the Hoosiers. In 1936, he earned a silver medal at the Berlin Olympics. He would go on to an illustrious 23-year coaching career at Rutgers University in New Jersey. During the 1930s, the Bloomington Panthers emerged under Coach Harold Mumby as the dominant high school program in Indiana. They won titles in 1930, 31, 33, 34, and 39 to claim 7 of the first 18 state championships held.
Holy cow.
The East Chicago Roosevelt Rough Riders under Coach Ben Williams tied Bloomington High School for the title in 1934 with James Sefton, Joe Brexa, Walt Zerwinski, and John Guinea winning titles to become Lake County and the Calumet region's first state wrestling championship team. They crowned their first state champions only 2 years earlier in 1932 when Thomas McCarthy and Robert Frisbee won. Muncie Central under Walter Fisher claimed the title in 1932 after runner-up finishes in 1930 and 31. In 1933, the Bearcats would crown Willard Duffy as Indiana's second 4-time champion. He would go on to win 2 Big Ten titles and become a 3-time All-American at Indiana under Coach Tom. In 1933, the East Chicago Washington Senators crowned their first state champion in Steve Zeman. Matthew Kaza, Frisbee, and Guinea won for East Chicago Roosevelt. In 1934, Robert Hake won Hammond's first state championship. In 1937, he finished second at the Big Tens and NCAAs to earn All-America honors for IU at a Nationals hosted by Indiana State in Terre Haute, a school that wouldn't have a wrestling program until 1959. Why they hosted this tournament, I have no idea. They had 2 guys compete in it, but they didn't have a team. Also in 1935, East Chicago Roosevelt's Walter Doring, Pete Vucinas, and Joseph Leconque would join East Chicago Washington's James Padalecki on the top step of the podium. In 1936, ECR's Frank Barber would join East Chicago Washington's Wallace Skierge and Nick Cutledge up there as well. Hammond's first coach, a man named Ari Scott, had wrestled for Coach Tom at Wabash and at IU. He placed 3rd in the state in 1925, and he was 3rd in the Big Ten in 1929. He and his Hammond High School Wildcats won state titles in 1935, 1936, and 1937 to earn the first three-peat in Indiana wrestling history, crowning John Etienne, Earl Zick, Lester Adams, and Hake in 1935, Casey Fredericks, Alphonse Janesco, Dorrance Funk, and Ray Frankowski in 1936, and Fredericks, Funk, Joe Halinka, and Frankowski in 1937. I tried not to write their whole names out if they're winning it for a second or third time. I just threw their surname in there. So
I'm proud of you for being able to pronounce every one of these names well.
yeah, I don't know. They're not around to argue with me, but there's a lot of consonants and vowels and very few vowels, I should say. Hammond's 2-time state champion, Casey Fredericks, would go on to earn a Big Ten title and serve as team captain on Purdue's first Big Ten championship team in 1942. He wrestled for Claude Reek, who led the Boilermakers from 1937 to 1968, coached 29 Big Ten champions and 11 NCAA or AAU champions. He won 6 Big Ten team titles, and they finished as the 1950 NCAA runner-up team. He also led the U.S. team at the 1959 Pan American Games in Chicago. Fredericks would go on to a stellar 30-year coaching career for the Ohio State Buckeyes.
That's right.
Crowning 9 Big Ten champions, 6 All-Americans, 1 NCAA champion, and he won the 1951 Big Ten team title. In 1937, the IHSAA added an 11th weight class, and Hammond Clark crowned their first state champions in Gene Vogel, Jack Foster, and James Gallus. In 1938, the 11th weight was cut after only 1 year. And Coach Wayne Cunningham's Pioneers would win the state team title behind the championship efforts of Foster, Gallus, and Elber Spizak for the Calumet region's 5th consecutive title. Hammond crowned 4 champs, Gerald Hatfield, Chester Malmquist, Halinka, and Frankowski in finishing second. In 1939, East Chicago Roosevelt's Mark Matavina and James Parator joined Hammond Clark's Foster and William Fetch on the top spot. This 4-year gap would tie for Bloomington's longest stretch without a state team championship in the 17-year history of the tournament. Between 1922 and 1939, 5 individual wrestlers would become 3-time state champions. Clarence Fortner from Terre Haute Wiley in 1924, George Ross from Wabash in 1927, Charles McDaniel from Bloomington in 1933. He would become a 3-time All-American, a Big Ten champion, a 2-time NCAA champion, and an Olympic alternate in 1936. Who would start Hobart High School's program in 1939. Chris Trikoff established wrestling at Calumet in 1939. The 1935 CHS valedictorian played basketball and ran track in high school because the Warriors of his era didn't have wrestling. His involvement in the sport was sparked by a new basketball coach, and you heard me mention his name earlier, George Belshaw.
Yes.
A Big Ten and AAU wrestling champion at Indiana who took the teaching and coaching job in the midst of the Great Depression. He introduced Trikoff to Billy Tom, and the rest, as we say, is history. In 1938, Trikoff placed second at the Big Tens, and he was third at the NCAAs. He earned All-America honors on an unbeaten team that finished second at Big Tens and third at NCAAs. In 1939, he went unbeaten, 10-0, and he won the Big Ten and NCAAs at 175 pounds for the Big Ten champion Hoosiers. He beat New York City College's Henry Wittenberg in his NCAA title match in a grueling overtime bout. Now, this bout was 3 5-minute periods, and there hadn't been a fall, so it went into overtime. And it went 3 3-minute periods. So this match lasted 24 minutes.
So did they just go through period by period, or were you guaranteed 3 periods?
If you pinned the guy, the match was over.
Okay.
But I think they went overtime to give him a chance to pin, but then at the end of the overtime, they just calculated riding time and declared the winner.
Wow.
It was decided by referee's decision.
Okay, so it was basically criteria is how you won the match.
For lack of a better way of explaining it to the modern day wrestling fan.
Right.
Wittenberg continued wrestling in international competition. This was in 39, so there wasn't an Olympics in 40 because of the onset of the war. There wasn't an Olympics in 44 because of the war. He wrestled, he continued training, he was in the service, and he entered into international competition, winning a gold medal at London in 1948, retired, and then got urged to come out. He was still training. He was a policeman in New York City, and he was still training at the New York Athletic Club, and he was coerced into coming out of retirement in 1952, and he got a silver medal at the Helsinki Games in 1952. But up until 52, his last loss had been 13 years earlier to Chris Trikoff in the finals of the NCAAs.
Wow.
Trikoff returned to Calumet High School after his college career, and he started a fledgling wrestling program for the Warriors. In 1940, the young Warriors finished 4-4 in dual meets, beating East Gary Edison 18-10 for the team's first ever win. Coach Trikoff would enter all 8 of his wrestlers in the open format state tourney, but all 8 lost their opening bouts. Junior George Cunningham won his first wrestleback match at 145 over an opponent from South Bend, Washington, but he failed to place. Wrestling at Calumet High School was short-lived, though, as the school closed down in 1941 due to overcrowding during the World War II years. Trikoff served as an instructor in hand-to-hand combat at Fort Benning, Georgia. After the war, he served as an assistant coach at Ohio State for Coach Fredericks before returning to the Calumet region. He later officiated both high school and college wrestling, including a couple of state finals and Big Ten championships. A little aside that I didn't have in my notes, George Cunningham, I found this guy about 15 years ago. I was going through some files I found the name, and I wanted to see if I could find the guy if he was still living, but he obviously wasn't. He's buried at Arlington National Cemetery. He joined the service his senior year in high school, and he rose to the rank of a second lieutenant in World War II, earned a Purple Heart. And about 10 years ago, my family and I were on a trip out east, and we lined up to go to Arlington National Cemetery. and I got a picture next to his monument wearing a Chris Strykoff t-shirt. Chris Strykoff had been his high school coach. I thought it'd be kind of cool. I got a kick out of it. I thought it was cool. But
Yeah, you're throwing everything into one picture.
and it's all connected, man. And it goes back to that YMCA and Gary and those guys from Lowell who, you know, everybody, all these coaches kind of came out of the Indiana connection from Billy Tom. And Billy Tom coached everybody. He coached everybody's coach early on. In 1947, he began what would be the second stint of a 32-year CHS career at a new relocated Calumet High School. He taught United States government, econ. He served as the dean of students, the head cross-country coach, the head basketball coach, and he was the longtime athletic director. His basketball teams won 298 games over 21 years, including 4 Calumet Conference championships. His Warrior cross-country teams won 7 straight Calumet Conference titles. They placed in the state's top 12 teams an astonishing 10 times and won Calumet's only state team championship to date in 1965. Wow. In the late 1960s, he also served as the driving force behind the construction of the Calumet Fieldhouse. Today, both the gym and the court are named in his honor. In 1965, he would reestablish wrestling at Calumet High School with the hiring of Roland Beckham. This is why the Calumet Wrestling Tourney was named the Chris Strykoff Memorial Wrestling Invitational after a basketball coach.
Yeah.
The 1940s. The 1940s saw Bloomington continue their stranglehold on the state wrestling tournament. Arlington pitchers Southport Cardinals won the title in 1940, as did Hammond's Jerry Fredericks and East Chicago Washington's Tony Marzia. Coach Mumby's Panthers won again in 1941, along with Hammond Clark's Sig Galanka, and in 1942, along with 4 region champions, East Chicago Washington's Al Lumio and Mike Veligan, and Hammond Clark's Helmut Becker and Dick Eggers. When Mumby retired after 1942, he was succeeded by one of his outstanding wrestlers, Clifford Two Bits Myers. Myers won state in 1931 and placed 3rd in 32. He was a 2-time Big Ten champion for Indiana in 1936 and 37, and he played an integral role on their 1936 Big Ten championship team. His Panthers crowned 4 champions in 1943, including twin brothers Henry and James Moore, to eke out a narrow 2-point victory over the defending champion Southport Cardinals. This was the first time that brothers, more specifically twins, won state titles in the same year. East Chicago Washington's Emery Nemeth and Eggers Clark also won that night. The IHSAA added an 11th weight class in 1943 and a 12th one in 1946. Due to the diminished number of schools participating in the state tournament during the late World War II and post-war years, the IHSAA would discontinue sponsorship from 1944 through 1949. However, the state tournament was organized and kept alive by a few of the participating schools around the state, continuing to host open invitational tournaments. It was hosted by Southport in 1944, Crawfordsville in 1945 and 46, Bloomington in 1947 and 49, and Lafayette Jeff in 1948. In 1944, the first of these state meets was won by Coach Pitcher's Southport squad on the home mats. Lumio from East Chicago, Washington, and Carl Nestor from East Chicago Roosevelt won titles from the Calumet region. In 1944 and 45, Coach Myers from Bloomington was drafted to serve in World War II in military service. During his absence, Coach Mumby returned to the helm of the Panther wrestling team. The 1945 squad would wrestle their way to his 10th state title and Bloomington High School's 11th overall. East Chicago Washington's Gus Baltus and East Chicago Roosevelt's Mike Brillo, Ralph Sterling, and Joe Parator won titles from Northwest Indiana. Upon Coach Myers' return from the service, the Panthers would reel off 4 straight crowns from 1946 to 1949 to close out the decade.
He was in the zone.
Bloomington's 5 consecutive titles would eclipse Hammond's three-peat of the late 1930s and up their all-time record to 15 state championships out of the first 28 years of the tournament. In 1946, Eli Popovich, David Lax, and Gerald Wenzel won titles for ECW. In 1947, ECW's Baltus and ECR's Eugene Donaldson and Russell Nestor won titles. In 1948, Reggie Skilling and Donaldson won for East Chicago Roosevelt, and Ruben Shahizian.
You did good.
Won for East Chicago, Washington. 3 East Chicago state champions from the 1940s lettered on Ohio State's 1951 Big Ten championship team. Dean Sangalis from East Chicago Roosevelt placed third in 1945 and won in 1946 for Coach Kermit French. Sangalis was also an outstanding official who called 8 state finals in his long refereeing career. George Maladette from East Chicago, Washington placed fourth, first from 1946 to 48 and was third in the Big Ten. He too refereed several state finals. Ronald Lax from East Chicago, Washington was second, first from 1947 to 49, and both men wrestled for Coach Herman Dickey's at East Chicago, Washington. Phil Thrasher from Bloomington placed second and first in 1946 and 1948. He later coached at New Albany High School for 40 years, and he won 14 sectionals, 6 regionals, 3 semi-states. He finished as a state runner-up team in 1961, and he coached 5 state championships, along with winning over 500 dual meets.
Wow. You're catching up to that, Coach.
Huh?
You're catching up to that.
I don't anticipate I'll still be around then. In 1949, I'm starting to get into the era where I know a few of these people now.
Okay.
Harold Bruckman, and I didn't know anything about this, but I'll relay the story. In 1949, Harold Bruckman won Hammond Tech and Coach Paul Homan's first state title after placing 4th and 3rd in 1947 and 48. On a personal note, Bruckman would come into the Calumet wrestling room in the late 1970s and the early 1980s to roll around with our big guys. We just thought it was some old dude the coach knew. He had this Amish beard. He had a dip of tobacco in his mouth. He came in all dirty. He worked in the mill. He was probably in his late 40s, early 50s, kicked off his Brogan shoes and put on these ancient wrestling shoes. And he had these little 3/4 length tights that went below his knees. And we thought it was kind of comical until he grabbed a hold of us. He was a stud wrestler who had like old man strength that you didn't know what to do with.
Right. Just coming off of work with all that energy too.
Just coming out of work. Like I said, he was still quite a handful, well into his late 40s and 50s, even after working his shift at the mill before coming to practice. Between 1940 and 49, 5 more Indiana wrestlers became 3-time state champions. Vernon Finley from Bloomington in 1945, Jack Benson from Bloomington in 1947, Richard Lyon from Bloomington in 1947, Richard Perkins from Muncie Central in 1948, and Eugene Donaldson from East Chicago Roosevelt in 1949. The 1949 state tournament would be the last time the tournament would be held on one weekend. The 1950 state tournament would include, for the first time, the use of sectionals to determine the wrestlers that would advance to participate in the state finals to be held the following week. 2 sectionals comprised of 10 schools each were held, with the champions and runners-up qualifying for state. The site of the state finals would begin to alternate in 1950 between Lafayette Jefferson and Bloomington High School, and this would continue throughout the 1950s. The 1950s. In 1950, the IHSAA resumed sponsorship of the state wrestling tournament for the first time since 1943. The 2 sectional host sites would be Bloomington High School in the southern half of Indiana and East Chicago Roosevelt in the north. Bloomington and South Bend Central emerged victorious from the initial sectionals. 13 schools qualified 48 wrestlers for the state finals, with the champions paired against the runner-up from the other site in the opening round. The Bloomington Panthers of Coach Myers picked up in 1950 where they had left off in 1949 by winning their 6th consecutive championship, a new record. Hammond Tech's Manuel Ramirez and John Cuppinger also won in 1950. In 1951, the tournament format was tweaked again, as 23 schools entered 264 wrestlers. The opening round was expanded to 4 sites: Southport, Lafayette Jeff, South Bend Central, and Bloomington all hosted 5 or 6 team sectionals. The Calumet regional powers were split up, with East Chicago Washington and Hammond Clark being sent south to Lafayette Jeff, and East Chicago Roosevelt and Hammond Tech trekking east to South Bend Central. The 4 hosts all won their sectional. 12 schools qualified 48 for the 4-man brackets at state. Only sectional champions qualified for state, and they were paired with a revolving formula that rotated from weight class to weight class. Okay. As the sport of wrestling continued to grow around the state, different schools and regions took their turn dominating the state finals. The 1950s offered more parity than the 3 decades that preceded them. 7 different schools won state championships in the 50s, with 5 winning their first title. Bloomington won in 1950, 1953, and 1957 to secure Coach Clifford Meyer's spot in history, solidly in 2nd place with 8 titles and just behind Harold Mumby's 10. Southport won in 1951, 1954, and 1955 to move Coach Chauncey McDaniel ahead of Arlington Pitcher at Southport, 3 titles to 2. From 1922 to 1951, the only IHSAA rules that governed Indiana high school wrestling were the general IHSAA rules that applied to all sports in Indiana, such as eligibility and age requirements. The rules used for the state tournament and for meets during the regular season were the National Intercollegiate Wrestling Coaches and enforced as rules by the tournament officials. As the sport of wrestling grew and as more teams and coaches began to participate in the state tournament, it became harder to enforce these rules. Beginning in the 1951-52 wrestling season, a new set of rules was adopted by the IHSAA for the governing of Indiana high school wrestling. The rules were written jointly by high school coaches Clifford Myers of Bloomington and Chauncey McDaniel of Southport. These rules remained in effect until the 57-58 wrestling season, when certain modifications were made requiring mid-season weight certification. These modified rules remained in effect until 1973, when the National Federation of High Schools, the NFHS, their rules were written, for which the Indiana rules served as their principal model. In 1951, the Cardinals put 5 men into the finals, only to have all 5 lose their championship bouts. It was the first time a team had ever managed to win state without crowning a single champion. Their 3 third-place finishers, however, made all the difference in the team race, which was decided by a mere 4 points. Hammond Tech's Ed Langle and Cuppinger won titles, along with ECR's Harry Davids and Alex Kowalski. Indianapolis Arsenal Tech won the state title in 1952, giving the Titans and Coach William Treichler their first titles. Hammond Tech's Frank Linzo and East Chicago Washington's John Shahigian, his brother, I screwed up on his brother a minute ago, John Shahigian, also won. Indianapolis Broad Ripple under William Circa and Richmond under Charles Hilton tied for the title in 1958, and Indianapolis Shortridge under Paul Dill won in 1959. In 1954, another format change would modify the tournament, as 36 schools entered 420 wrestlers at the 4 sectionals. Each of the 4 sites, Bloomington, Muncie Central, East Chicago, which now was rotating between Roosevelt and Washington on a year-to-year basis, and Lafayette Jeff would host 9 team sectionals. The champions and runners-up would both advance to the state finals in an 8-man bracket. Pairing the champions against runners-up in the opening round, all first-round losers would be eliminated. The toughest Calumet region team in the 1950s was Hammond Tech under Coach Paul Homan. The Tigers placed 3rd in 1950, 3rd in 51, and 5th in 1955. They crowned 8 state champions in the decade. Tech's Harry Coleus was a 3-time sectional champion, a Northern Indiana Conference champion, and he placed third in 1952, third in 1953, and he won the state championship in 1955. Harry was one of my favorite old timers to run into at any wrestling event. I first got to know him as Jim's dad. His son Jim wrestled for Munster High School and Indiana University. He also coached wrestling at Morton, Highland, and Munster. Harry was always showing up and holding court at his son's matches, cheering for region guys at the Midlands or Big Tens, or just bragging about how many consecutive state finals, Midlands, or Big Tens he'd attended. I never knew he'd wrestled until late in his life and late in our friendship. I actually read or saw something about it online later. He never talked about his career achievements, and they were impressive. He wanted to know about you and yours. Harry was a blue-collar kind of guy, a great wrestler, a great guy, and one hell of a wrestling fan. Harry's Tiger teammates, Don Jamrose and Jerry Reeves, won state titles in 1953 and 1955, respectively, for Tech. In 1957, East Chicago, Washington's Bill Wilmot won for the Senators. For the young folks on here that have never heard of Hammond Tech High School, it closed down when I was in college in the early 1980s, but it was in the building that today serves as the Hammond Area Career Center over by the Hammond Civic Center, north of the Hammond Civic Center. That was Hammond Tech High School. It was right in the same neighborhood, kind of catty corner from Hammond High School. In 1958, the tournament was modified again, as 62 schools entered 8 sectionals. Each of the 8 sites would host 6 to 10 teams. The champions and runners-up from the 8 sectional sites would advance to one of 2 regionals at Bloomington and Lafayette Jefferson. The regional would be an 8-man bracket with a formula pairing the champions against runners-up in the opening round. First round losers would be eliminated, and the champions and runners-up would advance to the state finals in a 4-man bracket with champions wrestling runners-up in the opening round. The South Bend Central Bears, under Coach Robert Jones, placed second in the state in 1942, 1949, 1950, 1951, and 1952. And you thought the Buffalo Bills had a lot of hardship with 4 consecutive Super Bowl losses.
I mean, he was dancing, but boy, he had some nimble. He didn't have nimble toes.
He was a champion wrestler at Wabash High School for Billy Tom, and he wrestled for Billy Tom at IU. He was an All-American.
Billy Tom coached everywhere, didn't he?
Yeah. He coached everybody that did any coaching in Indiana in the early years, that's for sure. In 1952, the Bears' own Howard Fisher would become only the 3rd Indiana wrestler to win 4 state titles. Coach Jones himself placed second, first, and first in the state for Wabash from 1928 to 1930. He wrestled at Indiana for Billy Tom, and he won 2 Big Ten titles for the Hoosiers. He was on 2 Big Ten championship teams in 1932 and 33. He finished as an All-American in 1932 when he finished 3rd, in 1933 when he was a runner-up, and he was an integral cog on that 1932 national championship team. In 1956, his South Bend Central Bears would finally win the elusive state championship after 5 runner-up finishes. Between 1950 and 1959, 2 more Indiana wrestlers would become 3-time state champions. Bill Richardson from Lafayette Jefferson in 1958 and Bill Andrews from Indianapolis Manual in 1959. Indiana State University establishes wrestling under Coach Chuck Sanders. Throughout the early years of wrestling in Indiana, Billy Tom's proteges from Indiana University supplied most of the high school wrestling coaches around the state. In 1959, Indiana State Teachers College, would lure Coach Chester Chuck Sanders away from his position as assistant football, golf, and wrestling coach at Wabash College to establish wrestling as a varsity sport for the Sycamores. That trend would change with the growth of Sanders' program at Indiana State. During his tenure, Indiana State won 5 Indiana Collegiate Conference championships, including 3 straight from 1966 through 1968. Sanders was named Indiana Collegiate Conference Coach of the Year all 3 years. He guided Indiana State to their best finish ever at the NAIA championships as the Sycamores finished 3rd in 1963, 4th in 64, and 9th in 65. Several Sycamores earned NAIA All-American recognition during those years, including Maurice Rogers, Roland Beckham, who was a 3-time All-American, John Welliver, a 2-timer, Tom Porter, a 2-timer, James Hill, a 2-timer, Richard Surveys, my college coach's brother, and Edward Freeze, 1-timers. In his final season as a Sycamore wrestling coach, Sanders guided Indiana State to a tie for 15th in the NCAA championships. Bob Ferraro finished as a runner-up in the 1970 NCAA tournament at 150 pounds. Coach Sanders was selected to coach the East team in the postseason East-West All-Star Classic. Indiana State was moved up to the University Division in 1966, with the Sycamores tying for 23rd at the 66 NCAAs, 37th in 1967, and 32nd in 1968. Sanders officiated at the NCAA Wrestling Championships on several occasions after he retired from coaching. Many of his former wrestlers became successful high school wrestling coaches around the Midwest in 1960 to 2000. ISU would continue to train coaches under Gray Simons and Fran McCann until the program was dropped in the mid-1980s. The 1960s. Parity was the name of the game again in the 1960s, as 8 different teams won state championships, 4 for the first time. The Indianapolis Public Schools, IPS, would make their mark in the 1960s, claiming 4 team titles. The new decade also saw the state wrestling finals moved from Indiana University in Bloomington to Southport High School's spacious new 7,200-seat field house, centrally located just 10 miles south downtown Indianapolis. Southport would remain the home of the state wrestling finals from 1960 until 1980. In 1960, Indianapolis would, under Frank Savarchkov, would become the 4th IPS city school to win a state wrestling championship since 1952. And I learned something here. I did not know what Indianapolis Wood's mascot nickname was, and this made me laugh. The Woodchucks would repeat in 1961, becoming only the 2nd team in history to win the state title without crowning an individual champion. The top 5 teams would all finish within 5 points that year.
Holy cow.
Hammond Tech's Tim Haley and East Chicago, Washington's Maurice Rogers won in 1960, as Hammond's Robert Haley and ECW's Richie Rogers did in 1961. In 1962, Hammond would return to the winner's circle with Don Clark at the helm. The Wildcats would crown state champions Daniel Mudd and Robert Haley on their way to the top. Tom Cameron of Hammond Tech would claim a 3rd title for the Calumet region that night. Cameron became the head coach at Maryville from 1973 to 1992, where he led the Pirates to 8 sectionals, 4 regionals, and 3 semi-state championships, as well as 6 top 10 finishers at state. Coach Cameron went 171, 45, and 3 in duels, and he coached 4 state champions, including the program's first in 1974, Ken Dyke. Cameron was an active Indiana High School Wrestling Coaches Association officer who was instrumental in implementing the dual team tourney that was in place from 1996 to 2012. The Indiana High School Wrestling Coaches Association, established in 1962. The idea for the IHSWCA was first conceived by Coach Norman Willie of Lafayette Jeff. Coach Chauncey McDaniel of Southport sent out a letter to one coach from each of the 8 sectionals to organize the coaches who were truly interested in the growth of Indiana wrestling. The first meeting of the Indiana High School Wrestling Coaches Association was in the spring of '62 at Southport High School. Coaches attending this inaugural meeting were Don Clark of Hammond, Jack Foster of Indianapolis Manual, Clifford Freiberger of East Chicago, Washington, Kermit French of East Chicago, Roosevelt, Joe Gossman of Evansville, Mater Dei, Paul Homan of Hammond Tech, Raleigh Hoover of Elkhart, Chauncey McDaniel of Southport, Clifford Myers of Bloomington, Joe Pataxel of Logansport, Tom Turner of Evansville Central, and Norman Wiley of Lafayette Jeff. This group would lay claim to 15 state team championships and 9 runner-up trophies during their coaching tenures. Over the years, the IHSWCA has played an integral role in the growth of wrestling in Indiana. The association has hosted coaching clinics, organized the Hall of Fame, initiated team and individual rankings, and promoted good relations with the IHSAA to further the advancement of Indiana wrestling through rules and tournament format changes. In 1963, the tournament format was changed again, as schools were entered in 16 sectionals of from 12 to 14 teams. The champions from the 16 sectionals would advance to one of 4 regionals, either at ECR, ECW, Greencastle, Lafayette Jeff, or Warren Central. The regional would be a 4-man bracket with a formula pairing the sectional champs in the opening round. The first round losers and second place would be eliminated. The regional champions would then advance to the state finals in a 4-man bracket with a formula pairing the champions up in the opening round. Hammond High defended their state title in 1963. The Wildcats won by 3 points in one of the closest team races in history. Only 5 points separated the top 5 teams. Coach Don Clark's men finished with 2 fourth-place finishers and 2 state champions. Daniel Mudd defended his title with a 3-0 decision over Marshall Carter from Anderson High School in the only head-to-head finals matchup between wrestlers from top 5 teams. His victory clinched the team title for the Cats. His twin brother David would also win to make it back-to-back for the Mudds, marking the first time since 1943 that brothers and twins would win titles in the same season.
What a cool name, last name Mudd. When you're a wrestler, that's fitting.
This 5th state wrestling team championship for Hammond High remains tops for any Lake County or Calumet Region school in wrestling some 60-plus years later. In 1964, Southport won Chauncey McDaniel his 4th and final state championship. The championship round of 24 finalists would have representatives from 20 different teams. The Calumet region crowned 3 state champions who won their school's first ever state titles that night. Mike Hannon from Valparaiso, Noe Almaraz from Gary Edison, and Mickey Parmalee from Gary Wirt. Almaraz and Parmalee became the first state wrestling champions ever from the city of Gary. Almaraz was also Coach Bruce Sheriff's first state champion. Sheriff spent 37 seasons coaching wrestling in Northwest Indiana, 3 at Gary Edison, 1 at Chesterton, 27 at Portage, and 6 at Hammond Morton. During that tenure, his teams won more than 200 dual meets, 3 Duneland Conference titles, 13 sectionals, 3 regionals, a semi-state, and they placed in the state's top 20 teams 7 times. He coached 16 state qualifiers, 13 place winners, 6 finalists, and 2 state champions. In 1965, Indianapolis-Arlington convincingly won the state championship after finishing as runners-up in 1964. The Golden Knights placed 8 men in the top 4 of their weight and outdistanced the second-place team by a 45-23 margin. Their coach, Jim Ellis, had won 2 state titles on 3 state championship teams at Bloomington in the late 1940s. At Indiana, he won 2 Big Ten titles, and he earned All-America status in 1956 with a 4th-place finish at the NCAAs. In 1966, South Bend Adams, under the direction of Morris Aronson, won the title with 3 finalists and a state champ. Phil Costello won state for Gary Edison, and Lowell's Larry McMillan won after placing 3rd in 1965. McMillan was a 30-year IHSAA official who called 6 state finals and 1 dual team state. His coach, John Todd, won 5 Calumet Conference, 4 sectional, and 1 regional championship, coached 5 state place winners, and finished 7th and 8th at state in 1965 and 66. Todd was an IHSAA official for 50-plus years. He called over 40 sectionals and the state finals in 1976 and 1977. In 1967, Indianapolis Shortridge won the state title under Coach George Boland. The Blue Devils won a tight race with the top 4 teams finishing only 5 points apart. Their 3 qualifiers placed 3rd, 2nd, and 1st to claim the title. Coach Boland later returned to the state finals twice as an official. The Calumet region crowned Mike Garnier, Andrean's first state champion. Calumet, under Coach Roland Beckham, would claim Calumet Conference and sectional championships in only their second season competing. Ken Stegall and Willie Wadkins earned the first state medals for the Warriors, finishing third and fourth, respectively. In 1968, the Elkhart Blazers won with 2 champions for Coach Raleigh Hoover. The Calumet region would crown 3 champions in Marvin Sharinga from Highland, Warren Gamble from Gary Horace Mann, and Dennis Bond from Hammond Gavitt, all winning the first titles for their respective schools. 1969 would mark the return of the Bloomington Panthers to state prominence, claiming their first title since 1957. The 11-year gap between titles was the longest dry spell in their history. Coach Kay Hutzel's Chargers placed third twice, second, and first for their title. The Calumet region was led by Warren Gamble from Gary Horace Mann, who became only the third region wrestler to advance the 4 state championship matches, joining Dick Eggers from Hammond Clark and Al Lumio from East Chicago, Washington, from the 1940s. Each of these wrestlers would split their 4 titles, going 2-2. After finishing second in 1968, Mishawaka's Henry Wilk would claim a first title for the Cavemen and their coach, Al Smith. Wilk would return to Michiana after a stellar All-American career at Anderson College and coached the Penn Kingsmen for 22 years and 340-plus victories. He became a state-level official after retiring from coaching. Muncie Central's Pete Lee won the heavyweight title in 1969. He competed for Ball State and qualified for the NCAAs by winning the Midwest Regional in 1974. In 1976, Lee won the U.S. Olympic trials in Greco-Roman wrestling and placed 5th at the Montreal Games. Charles Cohn from Kokomo and John Galloway from South Bend Riley each won 3 state titles during the 1960s. The 1970s. Bloomington would start off the 70s just like they ended the 60s, with a state championship. Kay Hutzel's Panthers put 4 men in the 1970 finals. They crowned 2 state champs, including Hutzel's son, Marty. The Panthers would three-peat in 1971 with 5 finalists. 3 won titles, including Marty Hutzel's second title. The region highlight was Highlands' Dave Devich. Something just scared me, and I jumped over here with this green screen. I lost my place. The region highlight was Highlands' Dave Devich, winning the Trojans' first state championship. The number of wrestling programs was rapidly growing around the state. I made a mistake, and I'm going to correct it. The first state champion for Highland was Marvin Sharinga. Dave Devich was the first 2-time state champion from Highland. The number of wrestling programs was rapidly increasing around the state, and the growth spurred the IHSAA to make dramatic changes to the state tournament format in 1972. The revisions expanded the opening round to 32 sectionals of 8 to 10 teams, with the top 2 placers advancing to each of 8 regionals. The 8 regional champions advanced to the state finals with a revolving pairing formula used for the first round matchups. Highlands' Dave Devich would defend his title and become a 2-time champion. His coach, Larry Mo Johnson, a Lowell and Indiana State grad, would go on to win 4 Lake Suburban Conference, 5 sectional, and 1 regional title. He would coach 12 state qualifiers, 8 place winners. He would crown 3 state champions and place 8th, and 6th at state. Bloomington would win its 4th straight crown in 1972 with 2 state champions, but not without an epic battle from Beech Grove. The Hornets would lead until the final match at heavyweight, when Panther Burt Myers pinned his foe to clinch the title by the closest margin in history, 1/2 point. In 1973, a 13th weight class would be added, marking the first change in weight since 1946. Bloomington would split into 2 high schools, North and South, with South remaining in the inaugural school and retaining their wrestling coach and their dominance. The Panthers placed 5 men with 3/3, a second, and a state champion, Hutzel's younger son, Doug. In 1974, the Muncie North squad, coached by former BSU, former Ball State wrestler Fred Ginther, ended Bloomington South's streak at 5. The Titans, led by two-time champion Bud Palmer, pushed 4 men into the finals to outdistance the defending champs. Palmer would earn All-America honors on one of Dan Gable's early Iowa Hawkeye Big Ten NCAA championship teams. 2 Calumet region champions, Kent Swinehart from Crown Point and Ken Dyke from Maryville, won their school's first titles. On a negative note, both 177-pound finalists were disqualified for stalling, leaving first and second place unawarded. This was the only time this has occurred in state finals history. The title would return to Muncie in 1975, albeit to Jim Cartwright's Southside Rebels, with 2 champions and 2 runners-up. Hammond Morton finished second. The Calumet region crowned 4 state champions in Frank Colan from Portage, Tom Wren from Lowell, Jonathan Maley from Crown Point, and Albert Walters from Hammond Morton. The Portage and Morton titles were program firsts. The year 1976 marked another milestone in the history of the Indiana State High School Wrestling Tournament. In addition to the sectional meets first held in 1950 and the regional meets added in 58, semi-state meets were included in 1976 to further qualify wrestlers to compete in the state finals. From 1976 to 1980, the individual champions and runners-up from each level of the tournament qualified for the next level. The sectionals were expanded from 32 to 64, with 4 to 6 teams at each site. Regionals from 8 to 16, and semi-states were added at 4 sites. And the state finals included 8 wrestlers paired by a formula that rotated by weight class, and it pitted semi-state champions against runners-up in the first round. Opening round losers were eliminated. The 1976 state finals would be the most spread out field in history. Of the 26 finalists, 24 were from different teams. No team had more than 2 finalists or 1 champion. The Indianapolis Arsenal Tech Titans, coached by John Hurley, won their first team title since 1952, and an IPS team won for the first time since 1967. Dwayne Ingram was Tech's lone champion to go along with a 2nd and 4th placer. Ted Pataxel of Logansport won for the Berries, coached by his father, Joe. Joe Pataxel wrestled at Purdue from 1947 to 1950, placed 4th, 2nd, 1st, and 1st at the Big Tens, wrestled on 3 Big Ten championship teams, and won the 1950 NCAA title on Claude Reek's NCAA runner-up team in 1950. Joe started the Logansport wrestling program and coached it from 1958 to 1989. He won several North Central Conference titles, 23 sectionals, 9 regionals, and he coached 52 state qualifiers, 36 place winners, and 7 state champions, 2 of which were his sons, Ted and Frank. And Ted and Frank followed him to Purdue, as did his grandsons, Jake and Sam. In 1977, the upstart Bloomington North Cougars would win their first state title under the direction of Coach John Bo Henry after a runner-up finish in 76. They would win on the strength of 2 champions, Bob Krause and Kelly Moran. In 1978, Kay Hutzel's Bloomington South Panthers returned to the pinnacle for the 24th time, the all-time record for wrestling titles, and Hutzel's 6th. They outdistanced Warren Central by 1 point for the team title, behind champs Sam Eckerman and Keith Saunders. The spring of 1978 would mark the establishment of the Indiana State Wrestling Association. The ISWA was founded by a handful of coaches, parents, and fans to help grow and promote the sport in Indiana. Through clubs, tourneys, camps, clinics, exchanges, and a lot of hard work and diligence, the ISWA has grown to include over 10,890 athletes, 1,364 coaches and officials, and more than 210 local clubs and academies. Through their national governing body, USA Wrestling, they provide sanctioning, insurance, and worldwide competitive opportunities for Indiana wrestlers. Their motto, "Do it for the kids," was coined by Indianapolis Arsenal Tech's coach, John Hurley. In 1979, Coach John Hurley would lead his Indianapolis Arsenal Tech Chargers to their second state title in 4 years, behind 3 place winners, a third and 2 seconds. The Titans gained the distinction of winning a state championship without an individual champion, a feat only achieved 2 other times in state finals history. Hurley was a state runner-up on Chauncey McDaniel's 1951 Southport State Championship team. First, that team was also the first to win without a champion. Indianapolis Wood was the other one in 1961. Warsaw's Scott Hutcherson won under the direction of his father, Ron, state champion in his own right, for Bloomington in 1957. Bloomington North's Jay Wiley won his second title for the Cougars. David Lilovich of Michigan City Rogers recorded the only fall of the finals in 1979, in claiming the first state championship for himself, his school, and his city. East Chicago Roosevelt's Manuel Rivera, after winning the East Chicago sectional, placing second at the Calumet Regional, second at the Maryville Semi-State, won the state championship. After an opening round where all 4 semi-state champions in his weight class lost. 2 3-time state champs were crowned in the 1970s, Jim Cornwall in 1971 and Randy May in 1976, both of Bloomington or Bloomington South. The 1980 state finals would be the last time the tournament was held at Southport's Fieldhouse. It would also mark the final battle in a long-time Marion County coaching rivalry. Warren Central, under the direction of Coach Alan Morgan, edged North Central under Coach Keith Farron's leadership for the title 56-48. The Warriors placed 4 men. They had 2/3, a second, a state champion in Kirby Kepner, to the Panthers 3. They had 2 seconds and a state champion, Arthur Merriweather. Keith Farron wrestled at Purdue for Coach Reek, started Wabash College's club team in 1953 that went 3-0 and beat Notre Dame, while teaching and coaching at Crawfordsville High School from 1953 to 61. He pulled double duty for several years there. His Athenian teams went 51-15-3, won the 1961 sectional, placed 7th in state with 2 seconds in 1957, and placed 13th with a state champ in 1958. He coached at North Central High School from 1961 to 1988, going 273, 66, and 4 in dual meets. They were 3-time Marion County champs, 10-time sectional champs, 6-time regional champs, 3-time state runners-up, and he coached 10 state champions. He finished 324, 81, and 7 in dual meets. Alan Morgan finished 4th in 1949, 2nd in 1950, and 3rd in 1951 at state for Southport. He was on the 1960-1951 state championship team. He was University of Indianapolis's first All-American, placing 2nd in 58 and 4th in 59 after serving a 4-year hitch in the military. He coached at Franklin Central from 1959 to 1969. He won 3 sectionals and finished 2nd at state in 1967 and 68. And he coached 10 Flash state champions. He moved to Warren Central and coached there from 1969 to 1981. He won 6 Marion County titles, 9 sectionals, 6 regionals, 3 semi-states, placed 2nd in the state in 1978, and won the state championship at Warren in 1980. Morgan coached 4 Warrior state champions. The Calumet region crowned 2 state champions in Ken Tiroli from Hammond-Gavitt and Mark Scott from LaPorte. Logansport's Frank Pataxel placed 1st, 2nd, and 1st to join his brother and father as state champs in the family. His dad won for Tilden Tech in Chicago.
How cool is that?
Bloomington North twins, Dale and Dean Blueball, both made the finals in 1980, but Dale lost to Warren Central's Kepner, preventing them from pulling off the brother-twin combo for the 4th time in his history. Their father, Doug Blueball, won an Oklahoma State championship for Ponca City in 1953. He was a three-time All-American and 1957 NCAA champion for the Oklahoma State Cowboys under Coach Myron Roderick. The Cowpokes won NCAA team titles in 1955 and 56. Doug then won AAU Freestyle National Championships in 58 and 59, and he won gold at the 1959 Pan American Games in Chicago. In 1960, he represented the United States in the Rome Olympics. He won an epic battle by fall against Imamali Habibi from Iran in a preliminary bout after battling off his own back for minutes. Habibi was a three-time world champion and won the gold at the 1956 Olympics in Melbourne. Blue Ball was named the outstanding wrestler in the world after the games. The wrestling competition was held in the ruins of an ancient basilica in Rome.
Oh, awesome.
Blue Ball. Blue Ball would help lead Michigan State to the 1967 Big Ten and NCAA championship as an assistant coach before leading the Indiana Hoosiers as their head coach from 1973 to 1984. In 1979, after the Shah of Iran's regime fell, Habibi relocated his family to the United States. He didn't leave Iran, but he moved his kids and his wife out, specifically to southern Indiana. In 1980, while watching his sons compete near the Indiana suburbs of Louisville, Kentucky, Blue Ball noticed a young man competing for the New Albany Bulldogs of Coach Phil Thrasher. It was his rival, Habibi's son, Sohrab. Blue Ball and Habibi would later correspond through letters and the telephone. What a small world. And in fact, Sohrab went to Wabash College. My first day on campus, I'm moving into my dorms, and I see this big, muscular, hairy, dark young man who I didn't know, and I found out he was a wrestler. And then I found out his name was Habibi. And if you ever went to Doug Blue Ball's camp, you saw the poster of Habibi. You knew who Habibi was. He was actually a teammate of mine at Wabash.
Okay.
And he was a chemistry major at Wabash, and he's working on, I can't even pronounce what he does. He works in mass spectroscopy. He's been at Duke. He's been at Northwestern. He's a really intelligent young man, and has a cool story to relate to running into the guy that wrestled his dad in the Olympics.
Yeah.
Northwest Indiana wrestlers who've won the Ward E. Brown Mental Attitude Award. In 1969, Warren Gamble from Gary Horace Mann. In 1978, Mark Harbold from Valparaiso. In 2000, Marcus Shantub from Lowell. In 2002, Jason Cook from Valparaiso. In 2008, Eric Galka from Hobart. In 2010, Francisco Porras from Hobart. In 2016, Jacob Kovac from Maryville. In 2020, Jacob Maldonado from Maryville. And in 2023, Ashton Jackson from LaPorte. Calumet Region Schools, the most team state championships. The honor goes to Hammond High with 5.
Wow.
Second place is Crown Point with 3. And there's a third place tie between Chesterton, East Chicago Roosevelt, and Hammond Clark, each winning 1. Most team state runners up. Chesterton and East Chicago Roosevelt both have 3. Crown Point, East Chicago Washington, and Portage each have 2. And third with 1 state runner-up is a 5-way tie with Calumet, Griffith, Hammond High, Hammond Clark, and Hammond Morton.
Oh.
And there you have it, gentlemen. I hope I have not fatigued you as much as I fatigued myself. We have made a run from 1922 until 1980. We have mentioned every head coach of a state championship team. We have mentioned every Calumet Region state champion and his coaches' names. And I'm actually pretty proud of it. I know it's probably not much to watch, but I hope it was entertaining to listen to.
Well, here's the thing. This is one of those episodes where you can go back over it on multiple platforms and when you hear something, you're gonna say, "Hey, I was watching this podcast. I just heard your name on there. Now, wasn't that Grandpa?" And you're gonna hear all these other ones, and to have you go through and put so much effort into this, I know this is gonna sound funny, but I would love for you to make this into book form.
It would be stealing from too many other people that have done that. And I went over this 100 times, and I found 3 mistakes in it today when I was reading it that I'm kind of disappointed. I can't imagine I made those mistakes, but I did. I fully intend to post this on Indiana Mat and some other places, but not until after you guys broadcast it this winter during the wrestling season. I don't want to steal my own thunder from that presentation. I want to make sure we do that right. And the second episode is going to take me a little bit of time because I got to catch my breath from this one. It's going to be the smaller chunk. It's not going to have as much of the introductory stuff. We're going to pick up where we left off, though. 1980 was my senior year. 1980 was the first state finals I ever witnessed. And it was up close and personal because I witnessed it as a qualifier, and I was terrified as I walked out on the floor. It was the biggest gym I'd ever been in. It was the biggest venue I'd ever wrestled in. And next year when I went to watch it at Market Square Arena, I was really glad it was at Southport the year I qualified. So
yeah. Well, that was a treasure trove, like I said, Coach. We can go back over and over and over on every platform. I know I'm going to go back over this a few times because there are some of the references in there that the names are popping into my head, but I'm not putting a face to it, but I know the names.
Well, every time I'd run into a name, I'd think of a story and I'd think, I can't put that in there. That's reaching too far. I know I talked about some coaches that weren't from the region, but some of those guys had just outstanding careers. They were outstanding wrestlers in their own right. And I'm going to try to do my best on the next episode. I want to recognize as many region coaches as I possibly can and talk about some of the outstanding officials that have worn stripes and blown whistles all around Indiana.
Yes, we have in a few episodes coming up. Chuck Barnett, we're going to have him on as well for an episode to bring light to how to bring people into the fold of officials because
it's becoming epidemic. We're getting, the best officials in Indiana are all senior citizens. They're all in their 60s and some of them even, pushing 70, and they've done this for a long time, but we got to get young people involved. It's even going to be more difficult now with the explosion of women's wrestling. We've got to get women. We got to get women licensed and get them out there. It's going to open up a lot of opportunity for both. If you watch the Olympics, there were as many women refereeing at the Olympics as there were men.
It's only a matter of time. You even have women in the NFL now. They can do just as good of a job at paying attention as we can, and we can get as many people as we can in there. That would be great. Well, Coach, that wraps up our episode for today. Thank you for tuning in. We truly appreciate the support of everyone watching. Be sure to join us next week for part 2 as we explore the evolution of wrestling and its rich heritage in Northwest Indiana, featuring Hall of Fame coach Jim Wadkins. You won't want to miss this one either. Stay tuned, connected with us on social media for the latest updates and behind-the-scenes content. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share your thoughts on today's podcast. We'd like to hear what you have to say. A special thanks to Zach Miller, our chief editor, and Chris Ramirez, our producer. And remember, on the mat, like in life, it's all about how you bounce back. I'm Danny Bell, and we'll see you next week on Region Sports, the Pinfall.
When life keeps you busy, and you can't get to the store? Shop online with Strachan Van Til To Go. Our to-go service is easy to use. Register using your rewards account information. Fill your virtual cart and choose delivery or pickup. Once your order is in, our own Strachan Van Til team preps your order with care. With our to-go service, you can earn reward points and save time and money with our online coupons and weekly ad prices. Life made simple, shopping made easy. For more information or to sign up, visit shop.strachanvantil.com.
Hi, I'm Crowd Company's Lantern Man. For years, I've helped your family and friends save on their car insurance. And now I've returned to rescue you from high prices. Whether you have a perfect driving record or a not-so-perfect record. Follow me to the Crowd Agency for immediate and affordable coverage. I'm your insurance superhero. Crowd Company's insurance professionals. Highland, Merrillville, and Michigan City.
Thinking about what to do after high school? Consider a career with Boilermakers Local 374. As a Boilermaker apprentice, you'll earn while you learn. We offer excellent wages and benefits, and as part of our no-cost hands-on apprenticeship program, you'll learn from the best in state-of-the-art training centers and on the job. Become a union Boilermaker and get on your way to a great career. Find out more, visit www.local374.org or call 219-845-1000.
With electrical services from Economy Electric Heating and Cooling, you can radiate the perfect amount of light and energy into your home. From rewiring and code upgrades to ceiling fans, lighting, security, and more, Economy Electric Heating and Cooling's trained electricians will make sure you can enjoy your home on full power all the time. For a free estimate on electrical work, call Economy Electric Heating and Cooling at 219-923-4441, and you can visit them on the web at 4ajobdoneright.com. That's the number 4ajobdoneright.com.
First home, dream home, forever home. Tech Credit Union has the right home loan for you. Their loan officers can help you purchase a home, refinance your current mortgage, or unlock your home's equity to get a cash out for any purpose. Let Tech Credit Union show you why they are the better option for a home loan. Learn more at www.techcu.org or call 800-276-8324. Tech Credit Union is an equal housing lender and federally insured by the NCUA.
Flip the switch, a light turns on. Press the button, machines and instruments come to life. Touch the screen, communicate with the world. Simple tasks, guaranteed results, every second of every day. That's the power of power. And that's the power brought to you by the NECA contractors and electrical workers of Local 531.
Have you checked out Centier Bank's student checking account? This no-fee checking account is perfect for students and teens ages 14 to 24 and comes with all the features you need to succeed, such as a debit card, digital banking, and automatic deposit. Centier Bank can help you start establishing good spending habits today for your better tomorrow. For more information, visit Centier.com/student-checking or visit your local branch. If you are under the age of 18, your parent or guardian must also sign on the Centier student checking account. At the age of 25, your account will automatically convert to the Centier checking account. You must deposit $25 to open this account. This account is not eligible for overdraft advantage. Member FDIC.
Four Seasons Mechanical proudly serves Northwest Indiana, providing quality, reasonably priced, reliable service. With a quality and comfort guarantee, the professionals at Four Seasons Mechanical offer a wide range of services in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Whether it's residential or commercial, Four Seasons Mechanical is there 24/7. To find out more, the website is fourseasonsmechanical.com or give them a call at 219-756-7020. Four Seasons Mechanical, your indoor air quality specialists.
Earn while you learn from the best hands in the business. The Bricklayers Allied Craftworkers for Indiana Kentucky Apprenticeship. That's right, this is a paid apprenticeship.
I'm getting an education while learning a trade and getting paid for it.
The thing that surprised me the most about this apprenticeship program is the respect I have received after the proper time and training.
Classes start soon, so apply now. There are training centers throughout Indiana and Kentucky. We are the Bricklayers and Allied Craftworkers for Indiana Kentucky Apprenticeship, the best hands in the business.
We love home internet from T-Mobile. Oh, now mesh boost Wi-Fi all over your home. Taking a class in your attic, that dead spot is gone. Stream ballet in your man cave, learn to paint on your lawn.
It's glorious.
And now on the road, you can take T-Mobile Wi-Fi with you. Hey, stay connected and watch what you'll do.
Blythe's Team Sports in Valparaiso is a leader in athletics apparel and equipment sales. With in-house production including screen printing, trophies, embroidery, and more, Blythe's can help you to create the perfect look. For more information, visit them online at teamblythes.com. Blythe's Team Sports in Valparaiso, where the athletes shop.